Hello, everyone. My name is Larry Bumgarner. I'm president of the AITP Charlotte chapter. We're pleased to have you join us for today's virtual meeting, which will be the first for the chapter. Let me start off by saying that I hope everyone on the call is staying safe and healthy as we all face this global pandemic together. As IT professionals, we have seen both challenges and opportunities come out of this as we support a larger group of individuals working from home. On the positive side, many of us have been able to spend more time with our families and avoid the traffic headaches that we encounter when driving back and forth from our offices. Today, we're excited to have Aaron Brown, president of the Comtel Group, talk to us about how to optimize technology and influence in your organization post-COVID-19. Following the program, I will share some additional information about AITP Charlotte. At this time, I will turn it over to our chapter social media and communications director, Leslie Cawthorn, to introduce Aaron. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you, Larry. Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege and an honor for me to get to introduce Aaron Brown. Aaron is one of the most inspirational people that I've ever met. We met several years ago at a conference, and at that conference, and any time I've seen him since then, he brings an amazing amount of energy to any room that he walks into. I've never seen someone engage an audience or a group of people the way that Aaron can and does. Aaron, the president of the Comtel Group, has not only coached and consulted for thousands of individuals, he's led transformation in dozens of organizations. He's been featured for his contributions in other industries as well as technology. At Comtel, he's an award-winning executive and turned Comtel into an award-winning firm over the last 10 years through their work, helping thousands of customers with cloud services, SD-WAN, UCaaS, security, and more. Moreover, Aaron is not only a superb business associate as I use the services of Comtel at Universal Mental Health Services. He's also a very close friend as well as my life coach. During the session, if you have questions in the GoToWebinar control panel, there's a question section in that panel. If you just go down and type in your question, we'll monitor those and toss them to Aaron either during the conversation or at the end of the presentation. So let's all give a warm virtual welcome to Aaron. Aaron, please take it away, my friend.
Wow. Thank you, Leslie. That was a very generous introduction and one I hope I can live up to. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to the board members of AITP Charlotte, as well specifically Leslie and Larry for allowing me to speak on a topic that I'm so passionate about and coordinating all this. I want to start with a pet peeve about events with speakers and how often they take forever to get to any meat and potatoes. So I'm going to spend a few quick minutes, including a shameless plug for Comtel, and then we'll jump right into our topic. So for starters, you'll see, if you can see my screen here, the second slide is a contact page, and I just want to get my information out there. We're covering a broad topic, and there's no way we could do justice to all that's packed into this topic. So if you think I've missed something or you'd like to hear more in a deeper dive in a future webinar, I'm planning on turning this into an ebook and expanding it to going a deep dive on each of the sub-points we're going to cover. Or you want to just connect with myself or Comtel for services, reach out. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So with that, the last thing is you can submit questions throughout, as Leslie stated, and he'll be kind of curating and prepping those for us to cover those towards the end. Now, for a shameless plug for Comtel, I've got a diagram on the screen that's really about the consumption of technology, and there's a lot to take in here. What you don't see is that for every dollar you spend on a technology service provider, about 15 cents goes to a salesperson. Not a big deal, right? Until you look at your org's total spend on service providers every month. It becomes a very big deal. And the fact that 8 out of 10 IT leaders says they get little to no value from their salespeople. Simply put, Comtel is a managed service firm that invented the industry disrupting service category, Procurement Exchange Management, or PXM. It's the most powerful way to procure service provider contracts. The gold star in the upper corner here simply represents that the salespeople who drive little value, you eliminate them and have CommTel procure your provider contracts, and in exchange, you'll get to recapture those commission sales dollars from the service providers. You can use those dollars to fund professional services. You can see in the diagram the black arrows that work their way around the outer edge. We call it taming the 800-pound gorilla for you. Or you can keep the difference and put it back into your IT budget. Either way, the focus stays on helping you achieve your mission. So with that said, I want to move on to our actual topic. The subtopics we're going to hit, again, so much to cover, and I'm so thankful to get to talk about optimization of technology and influence. The first one being what drives your organization. We need to understand, no matter what position we're in IT, what drives the organization, and then how your role at any level can steer business outcomes, how your wiring and influence, how you communicate, how you're, how you uniquely are set with your personality, how that creates influence, how IT spend delivers business value, and then ultimately what relationships you can form to propel progress. So with that said, I'd like to move on and talk about a few principles that this presentation is really based on. The first is something I heard from world-renowned leader John Maxwell, who's written many things, including the line from this came from 21 Irrefutable Laws, which I'll reference later. He says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Now, I don't know if I agree that it's nothing more, but it's definitely at least 50% influence. And we're not talking about good leadership or bad leadership. We're only talking about, again, because you can have people with malintent, but leadership in at least half of it is about influencing others. And so the second point we need to understand is that influence is at least equal to or greater or more valuable than any other ability that one could have when it comes to attempting to accomplish goals, whether personal or professional. And the third point is that most IT pros, when it comes to advancing their career, when it comes to educating themselves, they focus on technology rather than business acumen or leadership or communication. And I think this is a mistake. I think that there's a place for all of the above. A lot of technology professionals err on the side or are naturally bent towards data, metrics, the tech itself, and that steers them away from this squishy thing called influence or leadership in many cases. And yet it's more an art than a science. However, it can be broken down into bite-sized, learnable components or pieces. The fifth principle I want to talk about is leadership and business are always relevant. And so related to that point, that although it's so important and we want to learn technology, want to understand technology, that the more you understand the business and then how to lead others and influence others, the more you can take what you know about technology and actually get it into use. The sixth principle is optimization requires multiple SMEs. A lot of technologists think in terms of learning the technology and mastering it versus bringing people together and leveraging different subject matter experts. And the only way you truly optimize an environment is by bringing together of the best minds on the topics where they can drive value. And then finally, one of the things that research shows is that most IT professionals average around 3.5 years staying with an organization. So frankly, there's not a lot of tenure. Secondly, job satisfaction on the U.S. is on the rise. Before COVID, it was still hovering around 50-ish%. That tells me that statistically, many of you don't want to continue to be part of your current organization, or they're not going to want you. Something's going to change. There's going to be a move. You may feel like, and be right, that your company leadership is not open to change. But what I'd say it's still better to try and optimize for a number of reasons. If you're going to be there 90 days or longer, I think if you're going to be there for another day, number one, I believe it's because whatever we do, we got to do our very best. And this isn't a popular belief in some circles, in some sectors. And I'd like to tell a little story about that. But my father, who's since passed, was a simple man. He told me everything we do, we sign our name to, and we only get one name. So, second, it's also a great practice for us to fine-tune our skills, whether it be on the technology side or whether it be on the influence side. And finally, if you're blaming the lack of results for optimization or influence on the organization or others, there's a chance to try some different techniques and possibly find out it's really you or it's not. So I propose if you plan on staying longer than 90 days, you ought to be as engaged as possible and practice the development of your skills. So I'd like to illustrate this particular point with a quick story. Growing up with my 4 brothers and myself, we all had to work in our family businesses starting at age 11. During spring break, Christmas break, summer breaks, it was all manual labor, which I didn't mind, but my father and I had creative differences by the time I reached 17. So I walked business to business, door to door near my home and found a job. And I came home and I told my father proudly I was a telemarketer for a pest control company. I think minimum wage was around $4 an hour back then, plus I got commission when anybody signed up. And so he said, don't do that. You'll hate it and you'll never make any money at it. Well, my dad was wrong about one and he was right about the other. I hated it. The boss was abusive. He yelled and cussed at people all the time, demeaning people. Remember, I'm a 17-year-old kid. There was 10 salespeople on the team. We were all in one room, and they were all angry, callous people. And so many of them had done this for years, and some of them were really good at it. And when my dad told me, he said, hey, you're there. You better do your best. So within a few weeks, I became the top seller by far, and the owner offered me $40,000 a year plus commission to drop out of school and manage his sales team. In today's dollars, that's over $80K. I was 17, again, and knew nothing about management. I would have been a terrible manager. I didn't accept his offer, and I quit for a better job a few months later. But the moral of the story is I actually learned a ton about business and influence, just leveraging a little bit of natural talent in my personality that led to sales, success in sales, and opened the door for a lot of other things. And I still use some of the things I learned in that first job outside the family business to this day and when talking with salespeople and other staff. So with that said, I want to move on from our principles to a couple webinar goals. So every time I engage people, I've got at least one goal. And in this case, is to have each attendee walk away with a clear picture on how optimized you are in your technology environment and your personal influence. And number 2, have each attendee walk away motivated with 1 to 3 relevant and manageable action steps that will propel us towards greater results. So we're going to do this through some interactive questions. So the first question is, rate your ability to optimize an organization's technology environment. Now, I want to encourage you to think about this. Leslie's going to open the polls in about a few seconds here, and it's on a scale of 1 to 5. I want you to consider 4 exceptional. 5 is you can walk into any organization, enterprise, small business, and you can optimize the environment technologically. So we're going to test out our polls here, and Leslie, go ahead and open the polls. Okay. All right, we're still answering. Let's see. All right, so 40% of you said that you were average, you felt. In other words, you could walk into most organizations and do all right at optimizing their environment. 60% of you said that you felt you were exceptional or above average in being able to walk into an environment and optimize it technologically. All right, let's go to our second question. Question number 2. Rate your influence over others. Now, I'd like you to consider you have to average this across all of your environments, socially, family, professionally, everywhere you go. And 4 means you're very influential. 5 means that basically everybody always goes with your suggestion, goes your way. And if you guys or gals are married, you'll I don't know that many will score 5s, but I'm always interested to see it. So let's see. We're going to open the polls, and all right, good. So we've got some people who feel good about their influence here. I like it. 71% of you said that you were a 4, and that means 29% said you were about average. Okay, good. All right, so we're going to move on to our first subtopic. What drives your organization, and discovering what drives your organization. So there's some key points that we're going to hit on. We're going to focus most of our time around this idea of mission, vision, values, and purpose, and KPIs. So we're going to touch on where we, let me back up. If you don't know what game you're playing and how to score points, you'll most likely lose. The problem with a lot of us is we can be guilty, and myself included, of focusing on the wrong things. We can focus on ourselves. We can focus on our preferences or what we feel good at. We can focus on the technology, on checking the box or maintaining the status quo, keeping the lights on or doing what's always been done, and so on. We must focus on the right things. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. Peter Drucker, considered by many to be the godfather of modern business transformation, in his book, The Effective Executive, points out, the job of a leader is to determine what work must be done. Therefore, the majority of his time must be spent on thinking about what work is most relevant. So we tend to think of organizations like an organism, this living, breathing thing that wants and needs. I think it's typically a mistake, though. An organization is a collection of people, and in author Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, he so brilliantly describes the law of the few. If you haven't read that, he talks about 3 personality types, the first being a connector, a maven, and then a salesperson. And these aren't job titles, these are personality types. And what he says is that ultimately those few people tend to steer the rest of people, the rest of an organization, in fact. And so we move on to what steers an organization with the MVVP, or the mission, vision, values, and purpose. And so sometimes, however, what's posted on the walls is not necessarily what's going on in the halls. In other words, what an organization's stated purpose or values are, we don't necessarily see those lived out. But if you watch, if you ask great questions, you can discover what really drives an organization. And so for a shameless plug, I'm going to go to ComTel's mission, vision, values, or mission and values anyways. And so if you look at our mission statement, what motivates us is developing people and systems that wow. We're all about delivering that people love their experience with us to produce that outcome. And then our core values, or our DNA, are servant leadership, grow or die, and tenacity. And what we found is if we hire people and they come in and we discover that they're not tenacious, they just get burnt out by our organization. They don't last, and they're miserable. And we're miserable having them. And there's other organizations where they'd fit wonderfully in. So without spending any more time on the qualitative aspects of what drives an organization, let's just say it's important to identify what's really driving your organization, or the people who are driving your organization, what's motivating them. So admittedly, these qualitative factors are squishier than, let's say, metrics. So I'd like to move on to talking about KPIs. And so for those of you at the higher level of your organization, you're familiar with KPIs. Some of you might not be, but key performance indicators. Most organizations have a handful to a dozen metrics that the executive team uses to drive every decision. All other metrics roll up to support these primary ones. And so, okay, there's lots of factors here to address. With such a broad spectrum of IT pros in the meeting, let me just say, regardless of whether you're a sysadmin or a CIO, you must attempt to learn and manage your work and communication to satisfy these KPIs. I'm going to share a diagram here that I'm going to talk about in just a second. So please don't make the mistake of thinking you're exempt from this because of your position or because of the culture of your organization. as you're doing your tactical planning, your daily, weekly, or monthly, or just accepting and reporting on technical work, you must be aware of how the things leadership prioritizes relates directly and indirectly to your everyday activity. Let's use this example. So I'm a sysadmin, and my company has made it clear that they value revenue above all else. They don't value IT as a strategic business tool, but just a cost of doing business. How can I impact revenue? Let's say your sales guys are regularly coming to you with their laptops going down, and it seems that it's about every week, it's 2 of them. And it happens to all of them at least quarterly. The time they're down is approximately a day to get it fixed and back to them. And the average sales volume per day is about 10K it's about 10K per. And it's to do with an application that's not playing nice with their operating system, rather doing what you're told. So you do what you're told, rather than doing what you're told and fixing it twice a week, and the company losing about $500,000 or $1 million a year if it's twice a week. You discover another app that has the same features and that doesn't have the issues with the operating system. You just ensured the company those sales and secured that primary KPI. Or maybe you can't get them to go to a different app, but you can reduce the turnaround time and get that laptop back to them in half a day instead of a full day, and you recaptured half the sales. The point is identifying what drives your org, and what you can do directly or indirectly to impact that is paramount. You might have to go to HR to find average salaries of employees, or you might have to buy a sales guy a coffee or a lunch to get him to talk to you about his sales numbers. Conversely, there are areas that leadership says, this is an important project and it doesn't have anything to do with KPIs, but it has to get done. That's okay, but too often we operate outside of the KPI priorities, and we can end up spending multiple cycles on repair issues just trying to fix something that keeps us from ever getting to the things that transform the business. So let's talk about this diagram, mapping and driving business outcomes. This is a fairly simple tool, but I find very few IT professionals are really doing this mapping of what are our mission and vision and values? What are the principles that decisions are being made off of? And how do those directly correlate to the KPIs? And so I would actually sit down, if you don't have this, I would see if anybody in your organization has this, and I would draw arrows from your values and principles to KPIs. And then I would draw those arrows from those to your current IT spend. Obviously, you need to get access to IT spend. And I'd try to identify what areas of your IT spend, as you look at the green, represents what's considered to be strategic for your organization, and the yellow to be considered semi-strategic. And then there's just the cost of doing business, right? And correlate those two when you come to road mapping and planning, where you should be spending and what it should look like in a new IT spend. Now, I understand that not all of you are involved in the budget and the spend, but I would encourage you that as we talk later about relationships and growth, that you can often get access just by asking and by asking for some mentorship. So let's move to our third question. How clear are you on the KPIs and metrics your executive team uses to drive business outcomes? Pretty straightforward. Let's open the polls. Okay, a little bit more distributed here. So we've got 20% of our attendees. Oh, we're still going. All right, we're going to. Okay. I think we got all our answers in. All right, so we've got 33% of our attendees saying they're not crystal clear on the KPIs that the leadership team uses to drive decisions. 33% of our attendees say that they're about a 3, meaning they have average clarity. 17% are a 4, and 17% are crystal clear on what the KPIs are. It's interesting, and I think it's so important to get crystal clear, and there's lots of techniques we can talk about how to do that and how to get that access. Let's go on to our fourth question. How clear are you on the qualitative criteria your executive team uses to make business decisions? What's driving them? What are their personal motivations? What are the values that are driving decisions? Let's go ahead and open the polls. All right. It looks like we've got 60% saying that they're very sure, or 4 out of 5 on the qualitative criteria. That's interesting. That's something more squishy is more known. I'm surprised by that. And then 40% of our attendees say that they are a 5 out of 5, are very clear on what's driving the decisions. So I'd like to move on to some potential action steps that we can do to become more clear on what's driving our organization. So a few things. We can ask for visibility into key metrics. We can meet with our supervisor to talk to them about their visibility, what they have access to. We can ask leadership how the values are driving decisions and make connections there. You can do a mind map, kind of like the diagram that I showed. You can read some of the great authors that talk about this, like Drucker or Lencioni. You can make a list of key phrases that you hear leadership constantly repeating, and you'll start to see patterns of not what they have written on the walls, but what they actually talk about. That tells you what's important to them. And then you can identify decision makers and influencers, like mavens, connectors, and salespeople in your organization, and what they're focusing on and what they're leading people to. And then finally, you can describe and identify sacred cows or ego or relationship priorities at the leadership level. So we're going to move on to the next topic, how your role can steer business outcomes. And so I understand that we've got people at all different roles and levels in this webinar. And I want to say that regardless of what level, this is first and foremost about forward and reverse engineering outcomes, understanding KPIs, specifically understanding the 3 to 5 top activities or responsibilities or outcomes you're accountable for, and what potential outcomes they can produce. We need to understand what tentacles does our domain touch. And it really starts with imagining business outcomes and business problems and goals that the organization is trying to solve for. And then we move over to what technologies or activities actually enable those realities and close the gaps. Does the organization need to save money? Does it need to sell more? Does it need to retain people? Does it need to shorten production life cycles? Does it need to increase customer satisfaction? Again, it doesn't matter the level of the organization. We have to connect these business concepts with the activities and technologies that we're working with. If you're new to your organization, you've got a lot of work to do to become aligned with the organization. If you're not new to the organization and you're not aligned, you've got a lot of work to do. So we need to start looking at the data elements that support or refute the opinions that are prevailing in your organization. We want to report on what is with analysis before we start changing anything or any type of change effort. One paradigm that leaders will view your role through is either your job is related to cost optimization or cutting cost. It's related to enabling revenue creation, or both. Are you clear on how your leadership views your role? And let's move on to a specific question. Question 5. How confident are you that your technology environment is totally optimized to deliver executive KPIs? Let's go ahead and open the polls. Okay, so it looks like we have about 40% of attendees saying that they are a 3 or average. They're semi-clear. We have 40% saying that they're very clear, and we have 20% saying they know exactly what how they know that their environment is optimized to deliver KPIs. It's impressive. Okay, so we're going to move on to some action steps for optimization. So, and how our role can steer outcomes. Let's list the areas of the business that need help. Let's draw a mind map correlating your responsibilities or your KPIs to the org's KPIs and the driving principles. Time blocking. I'm not sure how many of you use the principle of time blocking, taking your most important priorities, putting them on reoccurring appointments in your calendar to make sure you're getting that work done. Reading a great book by the Heath brothers, Switch, 80/20 by Koch, and then identifying the key metrics that tell the story you want told. All right, we're going to move on to how your wiring and communication creates influence. And this is not a typo. We have to start with knowing our own profile, our personality, our communication cues and behaviors. And then we want to learn the profiles of others. And of course, study some basics of communication. So let's start with leveraging your natural talents is the strongest way to gain influence. Don't try to become somebody else. Do what you do. And so it doesn't matter whether you use StrengthsFinder, Colby, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, DISC, PI, or 1,000 others. But learn one of the reputable tools out there by taking the profile and studying your own profile. If you've taken one, use that. If you want to try another, go get another. I'm a big fan I'm a bit of a profile junkie. When we hire people here, we put them through 3 different profiles because we want to know what they're going to do before they do it. We want to know how they think, how they're wired, because that is what you're always going to, move back towards. You're going to move back towards your wiring. Once you learn your profile and study that and read that regularly, you'll start to understand the framework of profiles better, and you can start to compare and size other people up. You'll notice you'll start to adjust your communication to the audience rather than to your personal preference, and you'll get a lot farther. But let's talk about communication style. Growing up in a house of 6 guys, I learned a very aggressive communication style, which basically whoever makes the most noise wins. Since then, I've learned a better way, and I'm learning a better way to invite people to view things the way I do rather than mandating it. One of my favorite influence techniques is one I learned about 10 years ago when I came to Comtel, and the founder, Bob, challenged me with this idea. You can control the conversation without feeling controlling. I found the best way to control a conversation or to control an outcome is in a way that is pleasant for everybody, and that's by asking good questions. It honors others and involves others, and yet the power is in the asking, not necessarily the answering, because you actually set the framework for the discussion by the way you phrase the question. Specifically, the best question to ask is if you can offer the paradigm or framework. And I'll give you a quick example. Many customers over the years have come to us and said, hey, I need to lower my cost on a particular technology contract. And rather than like a lot of salespeople or sales organizations do, is they accept the assertion and they try to drive and get the lowest price. I ask why. I found many clients confused by that. Why do I need to lower the price? Well, because I've got a limited budget. I understand, but why this one? Why this technology? I suggest a simple act of, okay, if we want to save budget, let's cut off the technology. And I'm often met with a baffled look. We could save a lot of money that way, though. And they realize that I'm being a bit facetious, but when we look at the outcome of the service that we're talking about or the contract, what does it produce or what does it enable? And then calculating the impact or the impact of not having that. Specifically, let's just take connectivity. And an organization doesn't want to spend the money for a fiber connection. And yet, as they look at the workers and the nature of them being interrupted on a regular basis due to lack of connectivity, they found a 3% loss of productivity. And that equaled the cost of about $1 million a year versus an extra $20K a year for the connection that would solve the problem. So by changing the paradigm, by changing it from, oh, okay, we need to lower the cost, and accepting their paradigm, and by asking, hey, let's look at this paradigm, let's look at X, it changes the conversation. And so the conversation changed in this case to needing the lowest price possible on the technology they need. So rather than the lowest price on the technology they need, it's a very different conversation. And let's transition to reception. Over 70% of communication is nonverbal. Regardless of what research you look at, people are listening and paying attention to the words least of all. They're paying attention to your tone, your volume, your pitch, your rate or cadence, your facial expression, body language. What messages are we sending unintentionally? Let's move on to our question and then some action steps. How well do you read and adjust to other people's communication style, personality, and motivation? Let's go ahead and open the polls. Okay. It looks, wow, we're all over the board. This is interesting. So 14% of you said, you know, you're not doing very well at reading and communicating to other people's style. I understand that. I personally very naturally have a very domineering, aggressive communication style. And I have to be intentional about inviting others in. 14% said you're average. 57% said you're above average at reading and adjusting to others. And 14% said you're ideal at it. That's awesome. Okay, some action steps for our communication and influence. So dig up your last personality assessment. Take a personality assessment. Print up the results. Talk to mentors about the assessment, about the results. Ask people you trust for honest feedback on your communication. Ask others if they've taken a personality assessment and what the results are. Watch YouTube videos on communication techniques. Interview the most influential people you know. Read Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, or Buckingham's Strength Finder 2.0, or First Break All the Rules, or Chapman's 5 Love Languages. Now, for those of you that know, this is a marriage book. However, the 5 love languages I actually have taught in seminars about for non-married people in the professional setting, and it's 5 motivation languages. The book was just set to the topic of marriage. It's people have different motivations. If you understand the 5 basic motivations people have, and a lot of people assume that everybody's motivated by the same things, but it's just not true. So there's some action steps you can take to improve your communication and influence. Let's move on to our 4th topic, which is how IT spend drives business value. So the numbers don't lie, people. To the cloud or not to cloud, outsource versus insource, analog, automate, or AI. There's some beefy topics here, which I'd love to get into in another webinar. But for now, let's just say you've got to get access to the numbers. You've got to get insight into where the money is going and what technology. You may have access. You may control the budget. They tell the story of how much of your spend is the cost of doing business versus strategic. It's always a mix. There's no organization that all their IT spend is strategic or all their IT spend is just a cost of doing business. That doesn't necessarily equate to the perception that leaders have. Some people feel that their IT spend is just a sinking hole of expense. And ultimately, there's areas of waste, and there's lots of ways to uncover this. This is something ComTel particularly specializes in, is identifying the waste and technology spend, part of our audit process. But ultimately, we've got to start to look at this with take over with a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying glass. But let's be realistic, especially as we talk about budget and on-prem versus off-prem, moving to the cloud. Some people talk about these in very hyperbolic terms of either they're cloud or they're not cloud. All or none is probably inappropriate for 80% of the organizations out there. They may still need some resources on-prem. If it's time to renew, we don't have to just, and a lot of it has to go to the prem. We don't have to just take everything back. You keep everything in the prem. You may find that, well, wait a minute, as we look at this, there are areas that we can actually pull into the cloud, pieces that don't have to stay. And there's lots of examples of this, but for time's sake, what I want to do is I want to move on to the idea of commodity buying. And ultimately, we have to be careful of treating strategic IT spend like it's a commodity buy. With a commodity buy, we ultimately want to just understand, okay, what is the technology I need? What's the cost of doing business or keeping the lights on? And what's the cheapest price I can get for that? Versus strategic buying, it comes down to what is the upside or opportunity or goal we can attain through the investment. And so for some, they'll talk about their data, for example, and it's that they want to compute and they want to keep that local, and they want to. However, data for some can go to the cloud. If we don't identify what's truly needs to be on-prem, the security related ideas, if we don't have the proper subject matter expertise involved in the evaluation and look at all the criteria, then we end up making emotional decisions on our purchases. And so, how do you find opportunity in your existing spend? I find a lot of leaders, what they're doing is they're taking the budget and then they're going back and they're just kind of moving it forward to the next year. Decision makers are more receptive to coming up with new ways to create business outcomes if we're focused on business outcomes. And so, again, there's a lot more I'd like to cover here, but because of time, what I don't want to do is just because the door has been closed in the past, I find a lot of leaders step backwards and they don't move forward and they don't go into these difficult questions if they don't have the subject matter expertise. Or they feel that optimizing can be a landmine. And so they stay away from it altogether. And so people think they're going to get sold on something, and what they end up doing is end up avoiding engaging the topic. We need to ID key influencers. We need to identify champions for the cause. And so if it's, say, for example, you have an initiative that you believe would help the sales department, you've got to find the salesperson who believes in the cause and get him to be your champion. And this transitions us into, we're going to move quickly to relationships we can form to propel progress. But I'm going to finish this topic with a question. Question 7, what percentage of your IT spend is strategic? We're going to go ahead and open the polls. Okay, so it looks like we have about 80% of our attendees that say there are 3, so they are average spend, half the spend maybe is on strategic initiatives, and the other half is on cost of doing business. About 20% say there are 4. More of their spend is on strategic initiatives. Let's move on to our next question. Question number 8. What percentage of your IT spend does your leadership team perceive to be strategic? These are non-IT stakeholders. This is the executive team. Let's go ahead and open the polls. And some of you might feel this is the same question, but it's really important to differentiate between what is actually strategic versus what is the prevailing perception. Interesting. A little bit more spread out. 14% of attendees said that they're a 2, meaning that their perception is off. They're viewing it more as a cost of doing business. 29%, or about a third of you, said that the perception is a 3. And about 60% of you said that the perception is a 4, that's generally aligned with the actual spend. Let's move on to some action steps that we can take to better align our IT spend. Ask for access to the budget if you don't have it. Study your budget. Ask peers for their budgets. You'd be surprised how many IT professionals I find that they're happy to swap budgets and learn from each other. Map your budget dollars to KPIs specifically, strategic or not. Reject hyperbolism and single factor analysis. This is so important. Don't give in to paralysis analysis, or analysis of paralysis. I forget how to say it. And determine the perfect spec before you go after the cost. I find many professionals, when they're looking for an RFP or an RFI and they're looking at a new technology, they go right to the spend before they identify what the spec is that they need to satisfy. Okay, we're going to move on to our last topic. And so, upline, or what relationships can you form to propel progress? And so this first idea, I consider it to be a cross-like relationship here. If you're in the center, you've got upline people, you've got downline people, and you've got peers. And I find a lot of individuals and professionals don't have a balanced relationship sphere. They either focus on people upline of them or downline of them, or just peers, and they stay in their little silos. And that's true not only inside your organization, but outside your organization. Divisional stakeholders we need to get familiar with. Vendors, we need to get good vendor partners. And then industry and non-industry peers. Quick story, when I was 20, I was a personal trainer, and I had a few multimillionaires as clients, and I would pepper them with questions every time I saw them about business, leadership, life, the law, travel, family, everything I could think of. One thing I discovered about many successful people is that they like passing it on. And Zig Ziglar said, if you can help enough other people get what they want, you can get anything you want. And so we need to make sure that we're passing what we learn on. It actually makes us sharper. How do we get mentors and peers and mentees? Well, we've talked a lot about executives, but let's talk about networking. This AITP is a great example. A lot of times, IT professionals like to build relationships in meetings. However, we've got to get out from behind the keyboard. You don't have to go to the movies or go out on a date, but you may have to buy somebody coffee or find something other than the normal business meeting to start to foster that relationship. And you'll find when you're inside the organization and you have an initiative or something you're trying to accomplish, that when you've made a personal relationship, even bought it on any simple topic of common interest, or you've just taken the time to get to know somebody, that you now have champions within your organization. And something even more extreme, if you want to form relationships that make a real difference, try forming small tech champion groups. And that means get people in various divisions of the organization, get them meeting together on how you can better the organization. It doesn't even have to be IT focused. If you're the one facilitating this or bringing a handful of people together from different divisions, you're going to have a lot of influence. You get these people together, you talk about what are the goals and challenges of the organization, and you just become a little a mastermind organization. It's amazing what can be accomplished. Lastly, again, another shameless plug for Comtel, but really, aside from Comtel, I've heard many IT people say they hate salespeople. Okay, I get it. Most are a waste of space, but how many times have you talked to someone and they brag about one specific vendor they love, and it's changed their business forever? I say ask peers who their best vendors are, and or give salespeople 60 seconds when they reach out to you, and just let them give you their pitch. If they don't connect, if they don't hit home in the first 60 seconds, fire them and tell them never to bother you again. You just might find your next best relationship that makes a world of difference. So let's move to our last two questions. Question number 9, how confident are you that you have multiple relationships that consistently improve your technology, business acumen, and influence? Let's open the polls. Okay. Interesting. Again, we're all over the board here on those relationships. 14% say they're a 2. They're just not confident they have these relationships. 14% say they're average. About a third of you said that you're a 4. You've got good, strong relationships in many of these areas. And almost half of you said that you're a 5. You've got these key relationships in place helping you with business, technology, and influence. I love it. So great to hear. Okay. Last question for your self-evaluation, question number 10. How connected are you to stakeholders in divisions or departments other than IT? Let's open the polls. Okay, looks similar to the last question. So again, 13% said you're a 2, a fourth of you said you're a 3, a fourth of you said you're a 4, and about half of you, 40% said you're a 5. Good job, you guys that are building those relationships. Let's move on to some action steps and wrap things up for some questions. So, potential action steps. Make a list of the power relationships you're aware of in the organization, or the ones you already have for that matter. Are you giving them the time they need to gain the influence and insight? Make a list of the cross relationships. So who are some people in your organization that you think, man, I can add some value to them, I can help bring them up, or people who can bring you up? And who are some peers you think, man, I want to be in the trenches with these people? Read Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Go to networking events and post online and ask people to share about their top vendors. Us vendors love that, by the way. All right. Lastly, I have one more question. This one's for me. How transformational can it be on your career and your org if you fully apply yourself to one or more idea you heard today? Let's open the polls. All right. So looks like 75% of you said that you got at least one transformational idea today. And if you focused on it, it really moved the needle. 25% of you said a 4 out of 5. Great job, guys. I hope you found something that that you feel like you can latch into. And now I'd like to turn it back to Leslie for some questions. Hopefully you've been sending some in along the way.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. We did, one person has asked if you would be willing to provide a list of the books that you mentioned throughout the webinar with just a short, maybe a short summary of why you find that book to be transformational, or how that book can help.
Absolutely, yeah. So I have a reading list that I've been collecting for the last 20 years, and I've got just a slew of them. So I'd be happy to distribute that. So anybody who's interested in that, you can reach out to Leslie, or you can reach out to me. You've got my contact information. Actually, you've got my contact information. Don't bother Leslie with that. And I'll send you my reading list. There's some good stuff in there. And if you have a specific topic you're interested in, by all means, please let me know what that topic is, because frankly, sometimes the books don't always make it to my list, but just because of time and efficiency. So you have another question?
So on the upline, downline peers the graphic that you talked about, what's a quick way to realign those peer and upline, downline relationships if it's out of order or out of sync?
So, I'm a planner. So the first thing I want to do is I want to sit down, and I'm old school. I'm going to get a pencil and paper, and I'm just going to brainstorm and think about who are the people I know that I want to be around, I want to be more like, I want to learn from. When I was a kid, my dad taught me that when you walk into an organization, it doesn't matter whether the janitor or the CEO, everyone can teach you something. And so, although I think of relationships in a cross-like, you've got mentees, mentors, and peers, and I think it's important to identify people who you think generally fit into those categories. I think it's also important not to just stick those people in a box and say, okay, well, because they're 20 years younger than me, then I'm going to mentor this person. I've got an example of one on my team right now who is a young man, 24 years old. I met him and thought, here's a kid who I like, who I admire, and I think I could teach him a lot. He was a young business person. And frankly, since I've known him, I found that he's taught me every bit, if not more, as much as I've taught him. Now in different areas, but I'd say make the list, identify people you enjoy being with, and then I guess the next area is identify areas or gaps in your own ability, experience, or personality that you want to balance out. So when I was young and I started personal training and then coaching eventually high net worth individuals, I started looking at, I didn't know much about investing, although I started investing at 18. So I started finding people who are successful investors I know or have a friend of a friend to, and ask for introductions. And that goes within the organization too. I'm always a fan of picking people that I enjoy and that I think can teach me something.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
What's the 3 profile tools that Comtel uses for all your incoming employees?
Okay, so that's been a moving target over the years. When I came here originally, they used Predictive Index or PI, very powerful tool. Currently, we use, I think I lied, I think it's actually 4, but they're not all personality. So the first one is Strength Finder, because I've used that for 20 years. Extremely powerful, extremely simple to distribute. All these tools are online now for the most part. So Strength Finder is developed by Don Clifton and the Gallup organization. You guys are familiar with the Gallup poll, the #1 polling organization in the world. They've got more data on people than anybody. And so Strength Finder, Colby is the other one. So Strength Finder analyzes your natural talent that can be turned into strengths. Colby analyzes your cognitive energy. In other words, what motivates you and energizes you. We also use Wonderlic, which is a cognitive ability test, which helps us understand just your processing speed, because we work in tech and because we have to fit into all of our clients' various organizations and how they work. Our people have to be able to think quickly on their feet and handle lots of information and process quickly. So that's really important. And then we also used Wonderlic, came up with OneScore, which also has another personality assessment associated with it. So right now, those are the ones we use. And I'd say the most important thing is that you pick one, you try it. Another one that I've heard about that I've started to test out is called Enneagram. It's really popular, it's really simple, and it really just transforms the way you communicate with people and also operate in comfort of your own skin. So, other questions?
Yes, one more. What networking group do you find have been the most helpful? Tech, sales, community, etc.
Yeah, so I can answer that from my perspective, or I can answer that from a quote unquote, an internal end customer client IT perspective. And I think I have the same answer. So far, what I've heard is the organization that I've visited most is the MES, Midsize Enterprise Summit, put on by the Channel Company. And I met Leslie there. I've met many of our other clients there. And what I found is not so much the presentations, which those are hit and miss, because sometimes people they're speaking to such a broad audience like we did today. Sometimes there's a ton of information that we can give and that's really valuable to you, and sometimes there's only just a little bit. But in those, you're getting 250, 220 IT professionals together. Now that's for IT executives and senior IT people. But what I found is that networking, those meal times, those breakout sessions, you find that you're just transferring so much good information. In fact, I'll go in and I'll give a boardroom presentation for 35 minutes and I'll leave. And they say when the vendors leave, that's when you talk about the vendors together with 10 or 12 or 15 other IT professionals, that's when you get the most exchange and learn the most. And we've also got some, great awards from that show, which was helpful too. So other questions?
That's all we have at the moment.
Okay, so we said we'd be an hour. We are exactly an hour now. I just wanted to thank you so much, Leslie. Any final thoughts from you or AITP?
Is Larry still here? If Larry's still here, I think he wanted to say a few words about AITP.
Okay.
Aaron, thank you for sharing with us today and providing many great insights that we can all take back and use in our daily IT professions. We really appreciate your time today. It was a great topic for our first virtual chapter meeting. I also want to thank everyone who participated in today's call. If you'd like more information about AITP Charlotte, please visit our website at aitpcharlotte.org. We'd love to have you join our chapter. Membership is $50 for 1 year and is available on our website. Our next meeting will also be virtual. We once again this year will be partnering with the Charlotte CIO Forum to offer members the opportunity to hear another great set of speakers talk to us about challenges facing CIOs and their organizations in today's environment. That event will be held on March 27th, Wednesday, March 27th, and more details will be sent out soon. We will keep our schedule updated on our website. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today, and we hope to see you next time.
Hey, Aaron, we do have one person that would like for you to go back to the slide with your contact info. Would you mind sharing that again?
Sure. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
week.
Aaron. All right.
Thanks, Aaron.
Got it.
Leslie, you still there?